right, we're back. Round 3. With a few technical difficulties in there. We now have our third round for the stream here at the Collector Store in St. Peters, Missouri. My name is Leonard. We'll be looking at a match here today between Mason and Charlie. This is looking to be a really good one. I really like the teams that both of these players have brought to the tournament today. We've got a variant, what looks like a variant of Yuta Ishigashi's team from the World Championships from Mason, whereas we have a really cool Zacian-Crowned team from Charlie. I don't think I've ever seen a Zacian team quite like this. It's got some really neat Pokemon on here, so I'm excited for that. I think, let me make sure that, yep. All right, so the players are getting ready. I informed Tio that I'm ready to go as well, so this is looking pretty good. Really solid match here between Mason and Charlie. Look at the cool Pokemon that we see on each side. What awesome Pokemon regulation. Gee, we've got an Iron Valiant, Gothitelle, Amoonguss, Pelipper, Calyrex-Ice Rider, and a Landorus from Mason, whereas Charlie has the team of Suicune, Iron Hands, Scream Tail, Gouging Fire, Zacian-Crowned, and Ting-Lu. So just really interesting Pokemon on both sides, honestly, like all things considered. The Scream Tail on Charlie's team is, I think, one of the most interesting things. It's got both Disable and Encore, pretty typical for a Scream Tail, but also has Howl and Play Rough. So by using Howl, it can boost the attack stats of Gouging Fire or Zacian-Crowned, or the Iron Hands, or the Ting-Lu, and mean that you have to constantly cycle Incineroar in order to get those attack stats to drop. But there is no Incineroar on Mason's side. Instead, we've got Encore Disable Pokemon on his own. The Iron Valiant using Encore and Disable here. I believe that Yuta's original team did not have both Encore and Disable on the Iron Valiant. So that's a new addition here. Also, as we see the Never Melt Ice on Calyrex-Ice Rider. I don't, again, remember if that was original to Yuta or not. I should know Yuta's team better off the top of my head, but Mason there deciding at the last second which Pokemon to bring, and I'm looking forward to this one. I think we're gonna have an exciting match. The Zacian-Crowned has a naturally good matchup into Calyrex-Ice Rider, and in addition, this Calyrex-Ice Rider is the Terra Grass, not the traditional Terra Fire, which means that Zacian is going to be able to do a lot more damage with its Behemoth Blade attack. So let's get into things. We see a Suicune and Zacian start things off. Two shiny Pokemon, I believe both have Cherish Ball as well, and to the much more defensive Gothitelle and Amoonguss. So this is a pretty free Fake-Out Spore. The Suicune does have Terra Grass, so it can block that Spore fairly easily with a Terastallization, but I imagine you can't stop the Zacian from going to sleep here. It's trapped. It has no way to Terastallize out of this. The Suicune knows both Snarl and Scald, so even if you protect the Zacian, I don't know, like a Fake-Out Spore play, the follow-up of the follow-up turn, I think you can just always get a Spore off. I don't think Behemoth Blade and 2 Scalds will pick up a knockout onto Amoonguss. The Amoonguss is holding the Rocky Helmet item as well, so attacking into it will deal damage back to the Zacian, which Mason will love to see because you can take advantage of the damage for high horsepower later. A Scald Burn into the Amoonguss means that it will take damage over time, but Amoonguss just goes for the Spore into the Suicune, saying, yeah, you're definitely protecting this Zacian. You're not going to blow your Terastallization so early on Suicune either. And Gothitelle sets up Trick Room. So Protect here completely ignored by Mason, getting the best of the turn, as Zacian now is under huge pressure. It just protected. It has no defensive Terastallization. It's probably going to take the Spore. The way to get around that would be potentially going for a double Protect with Zacian. You could do that. Like, Gothitelle's probably leaving the field here, right? And so if you get the double Protect, then you can switch out. But the risk of doing that is if you fail the double Protect, which is more likely, then Spore will go after that failed Protect, meaning that you have to sleep for even longer. So Zacian here likely just to take the Spore and hope that sleep turns will go in its favor later in battle. And that's what we see happen. Spore lands into the Zacian. It will deal no damage this turn due to taking its mandatory turn of sleep. Suicune is also taking its first mandatory turn of sleep. It attacked after the Scald that it used on that first turn. So now 2 Pokemon here at 100% HP, but both sleeping. They are also able to switch. Calyrex-Ice isn't likely to go for Glacial Lance here. There's 2 resists, so probably a high horsepower coming out. If Zacian was forced to Terrasilize, then it'd be in a decent spot, I'd say. Because Zacian, again, is not likely to wake up on this particular turn. We do just see both Pokemon stay in. No attempts on Protects either. Rage Powder goes off. That will protect it from any attacks aimed at the Calyrex's way. High horsepower lands into the Zacian. Suicune takes a second turn of sleep. Let's see if the Zacian can wake up. It does. So it will be able to get off a huge attack here. The Behemoth Blade will likely pick up a KO on the Amoonguss. But the downside of doing this... Oh, it didn't even pick up the KO. That's huge. Okay. So the... Rocky Helmet damage from Amoonguss is definitely going to put the Zacian into KO range. That is certainly in the knockout range of Glacial Lance. I think it would KO even without Calyrex's Never Melt Ice item. So Glacial Lance is likely just to pick up a knockout here on Zacian, which means Zacian is likely inclined to go for Protect. Amoonguss here could just go for Rage Powder. That would prevent the Calyrex from taking any potential damage from going for Scald. A Scald into Calyrex, wouldn't do very much damage, but it potentially could get a burn. Zacian here is also very likely to Protect. I don't think Zacian wants to just give up the Glacial Lance KO and subsequent attack boost for free. So yeah, Zacian actually just switches out, saying, this is my opportunity to get out of here before the Gothitelle comes in, and Iron Hands is the one to replace it. So Iron Hands here is Assault Vest. Has pretty typical moves with Drain Punch, Heavy Slam, and Wild Charge. Calyrex opts to not go for the Glacial Lance, instead saying, I'm just going to play it hyper safe, cover for the Suicune waking up. That was a 50-50 chance there, but the Suicune does stay asleep, and now Suicune must stay asleep on this next turn. So Gothitelle and Iron Hand's speed could be important here. Depending on which is faster, the Iron Hands could go for the Fake Out before the Gothitelle, could stop it from moving, and then Calyrex would be forced to use... you could also Fake Out the Calyrex directly and just burn that last turn of sleep onto the Suicune. The Suicune cannot be flinched by Fake Out, so if Fake Out's aimed that way, then it would only deal a small amount of damage and effectively get no gain. It looks like Calyrex says, nope, I'm not messing with that. Switches out for the Iron Valiant. That could potentially be pretty tricky. If this Iron Hands does go for that Fake Out, then it could get locked into Fake Out if the... turns go its way, and but that's not what happens at all. Instead of Heavy Slam landing into that Iron Valiant, gets that play exactly right. Scald also lands into the Iron Valiant. Looks like there was a reversal of Trick Room on Gothitelle's side. Doesn't get this turn right at all. Gothitelle does go for a taunt into the Suicune, so that will prevent it from going for its status moves, which are, in this case, Protect and Tailwind. So yeah, doesn't want to reverse the Trick Room because it would have worn off on that turn anyway, right? Trying to get cheeky there, catching a Fake Out on the Iron Hands and locking it in with Encore. That would have been really devastating. I bet Encore, like you can Encore the Iron Hands and then Spirit Break the Suicune down. That could be pretty scary. But yeah, it looks like Mason's just decided, nah, you know what? At some point, I'm going to have to risk this Scald Burn. Might as well be now. 2 Glacial Lance into Iron Hands may pick up the KO. I would imagine a Glacial Lance into a high horsepower would certainly do it. It depends on how the Iron Hands is trained. If the Iron Hands has a lot of physical bulk, then potentially it can survive 2 Glacial Lances normally, but with that Never Melt Ice item giving you just a little bit more oomph on those ice-up attacks. We'll have to see how it ends up cashing out. The downside of this play from Mason's side is that you're basically just hoping that the Suicune doesn't get Scald Burns, but I think the reverse, Charlie is also just kind of hoping that you do get Scald Burns. Let's see what happens, though. There was a Scald Burn already on the Amoonguss. Will it get on Calyrex? No. Instead, just a Wild Charge into the Gothitelle. No burn here means that this Glacial Lance is going to do heavy damage. We saw that Calyrex is slower than the Iron Hands out of Trick Room, which means that here in Trick Room, yeah, you can see that Never Melt Ice coming in clutch there. With the Wild Charge, Recoil definitely going to be in KO range of the follow-up Glacial Lance. And Iron Hands is Terra Grass. It has no way of getting around that attack. So Iron Hands is going down for sure. We already have seen the Zacian-Crowned in the back, which is definitely in KO range of Glacial Lance. I think even if the Suicune gets a burn now, it probably will still be in KO range. And now Amoonguss coming back out in the field, switching out earlier from activated its Regenerator ability, giving it more HP. It should be able to take multiple attacks here from this Suicune. Suicune is likely just to throw another Scald at the Calyrex, hoping for that burn. But again, it probably depends on that last Pokemon. Can this last Pokemon take on multiple Glacial Lances plus Spore, and we do see that burn. Scald has a 30% chance to burn, so if you use Scald twice, then you're likely to get the burn on one of those hits, just how probability works. But the Scald Bird there will limit Calyrex' damage potential by quite a bit. We do see Screamtail come in. Screamtail isn't in a great spot here, though. Screamtail does not carry Protect. The Suicune does have Protect, but I believe it's still affected by that taunt. I don't think it's worn off yet. Either way, a Spore aimed at the Screamtail will put it to sleep, prevent any shenanigans, and now Suicune, after having burned this Calyrex, really has nothing to do. Like, it doesn't have anything better to do than maybe, like, Snarl itself. But if you Spore into the Screamtail, then you can Spore into the Suicune on the following turn. You can then go for Pollen Puff into the Calyrex and potentially heal that up. So it's looking pretty good, I'd say, for Mason. He's got some offensive pressure here with this Spore Glacial Lance combination attack. The Screamtail could Terrasilize. It is Terra Water, so that would be another Glacial Lance resist. But again, it wouldn't make you resist... well, not resist, but make you be immune to this incoming Spore, potentially. And we do see a Terrasilization come out. It is that Screamtail. It's going to Terrasilize to Terra Water, taking less damage from the Glacial Lance, potentially getting off an important Encore or Disable. Disable could be used to prevent the Amoonguss from going for Spore, or it could be used to prevent the Calyrex from going for Glacial Lance. However, preventing the Calyrex from going for Glacial Lance isn't too big of a deal, given all the Pokemon left are resists, and probably can be hit by high horsepower at this point anyway. Glacial Lance, you can see, after that Scald Burn, does much, much less damage into both Pokemon. Suicune here, having Inner Focus instead of the Pressure ability, does mean that it will be less likely to PP stall the Glacial Lance here. I believe Glacial Lance has only been used a few times. Disable does go into the Amoonguss' Spore, though. So now Screamtail does have the option of going for either Encore or Disable into the Calyrex. And the Amoonguss cannot prevent that with a Spore of its own. However, Amoonguss still has pretty good options here. Switching out is fairly reasonable. It looks like that's what is being opted for by Mason. The downside of this play is, I don't know if you're going to be able to get a second Trick Room very easily because, oh, yes you can, because you can taunt the Screamtail and prevent it from using anything. Okay, that's actually real clever. I think that's the angle that Mason's aiming for by putting Gothitelle on the field now. Amoonguss does switch out, and yeah, Calyrex Protect means that it won't be disabled from using that Glacial Lance. And Gothitelle has plenty of HP left, even if this is a Play Rough aimed at the Amoonguss, which would be a very bold move, given that it does not have much damage to speak of, and it would be a resisted hit and take Rocky Helmet damage. But yeah, just a Scald actually aimed at the Calyrex slot. So no damage dealt this turn, except for the slight bit of burn damage that Calyrex will take. But yeah, at this point, I think we're looking at probably a Glacial Lance and Taunt into the Screamtail. Potentially a high horsepower, maybe that's just better. But you could then, next turn, set Trick Room with your Calyrex, and I think you're going to be able to win for sure with that. But it looks like a double Trick Room's being considered? Ooh, I don't know if I feel about that. This is not great unless the Screamtail opts for, unless the Screamtail opted for a Play Rough, and yeah, no Play Rough outcoming here. So Calyrex is now forced to go for a second Protect. It attempted to go for Trick Room there, so Calyrex was able to move first, and yeah, that doesn't work. The Gothitelle now just reversing Trick Room, doing absolutely nothing. I think a Taunt there would have been really good into that Screamtail. Isn't what happens, though. Now the Calyrex is in an awkward spot. It can switch out into Amoonguss pretty safely. It'll probably get Trick Room up again. The Screamtail could disable the Gothitelle, but the Gothitelle is holding the Mental Herb item, so it will be able to get around either Encore or Disable one of those times. And actually, you can see here the power of Calyrex's As One ability. I completely forgot this Suicune had the Citrus Berry item. It's going to gain 25% of its health back from that. And now Amoonguss can switch back in. Play Rough is enough to pick up this Gothitelle too, so not messing around with Encore or Disable into the Mental Herb, instead picking up that knockout. And now Suicune will do a little bit more damage to the Amoonguss with Scald. So I think that Trick Room probably still can go up again. You could probably do something like a Spore or Pollen Puff on this turn and set Trick Room with Calyrex. Neither of these Pokemon are going down. A Play Rough and Scald is not going to be enough to KO either of these Grass-type Pokemon. The Screamtail shouldn't be able to put anything into KO range either. The Amoonguss probably at this point is the most important Pokemon for Mason, I'd say. It depends on how many spores you can get off, how many times you can Pollen Puff this Calyrex. I imagine that you can win the 1v1, but it looks like Mason doesn't think so. Throws in the towel, potentially thinking maybe I can't win this in enough turns, but I don't know. I feel like Spore into the Screamtail, set Trick Room, high horsepower enough. Maybe it's enough. Maybe you can eventually break through it, but potentially Amoonguss would die too soon for that to happen. So maybe seeing the writing on the wall and saying, I want to just get into game 2. I think the most critical turn there was not going for that taunt in the Screamtail. I'm really surprised there wasn't a taunt coming out. I think that would have set him up next turn for being able to get that second Trick Room, and then Amoonguss and Calyrex would be able to try to blast through with more Spore and high horsepowers. But yeah, with the burn on that, with the burn on that Calyrex, it really limited the damage potential. But I think this was the right angle to go for. That Calyrex did seem really threatening. I think another turn that really Mason lost out on was that failing to be able to encore the Iron Hands, trying to catch that fake out and then just kind of losing it. So the Iron Valiant ended up not doing very much in this battle, and I don't think it would have done that much anyway, even if it had survived. Even if you encore the Iron Hands, you're probably just going to be stuck Spirit Breaking the Suicune for a while, and eventually your Iron Valiant's going to get Scald Burned, and then you're going to have to deal with that too. So the Suicune really being a thorn in Mason's side, Charlie using it effectively there. I think it was on the field turn 1 and it never left, partially because it couldn't from Shadow Tag, but it also didn't really want to. Suicune is just in a really good spot here. Considering the Landorus, it looks like, it looks like Mason's considering the Landorus. Landorus would not be able to do much more damage to this Suicune. One angle that I think I would like to see, potentially, one angle that you could go for is, because Suicune doesn't have a lot of offensive pressure, if you do that early game, just like you did last time, where you use Spore and you weaken the Zacian, then potentially you could Encore Disable Lock the Suicune and trip it down via Struggle that way. Although Suicune can get multiple Scalds off, it doesn't get them off very quickly. Also, disabling Scald could be really impactful too, because that would limit Suicune's offensive options to just be Snarl. So, doesn't look like that was what was selected for Game 2. We'll see how it shakes out. We got Suicune the Triumphant and Zacian, once again, into this Gothitelle and Landorus. So, immediately, this Choice Scarf on Landorus is going to be threatening heavy damage into the Zacian, but it's not really damage that I think Charlie can't deal with. Very simple Protect and Tailwind will get around this play. By doing that option, then you can stop the Suicune from setting Tailwind and then just Earth Power the Zacian next turn, or force it to Terrasilize. Forcing it to Terrasilize would have some benefit as well. Looks like there's a taunt aimed at that Suicune, so we'll see who's faster between this Gothitelle and Suicune. It's actually a hard read, just predicting that this Zacian, there's no way you'll ever just get me this KO, and it's a taunt into the Suicune! Faster than the Suicune. This Gothitelle is super fast, zooming past the Suicune, who doesn't go for a Tailwind, so doesn't get the perfect turn there, but does get a Snarl off into this Landorus, and probably not as... so that speed interaction there being pretty impressive, but I think still ultimately in Charlie's favor there. Now Zacian is almost certainly going to Terrasilize. By Terrasilizing, it will be able to survive this incoming Earth Power very comfortably. Probably can get a knockout onto the Gothitelle. A Behemoth Blade and Scald should definitely get the Gothitelle for sure. And Gothitelle cannot defensively Terrasilize. It's Terra Ground, as you can see from the little sparkles there. So potentially considering Helping Hand. Again, that doesn't work if the Terrasilization comes out. So you have to, I think Mason has to consider, like, how much am I willing to commit to this damage on the Landorus? Is it worth it? It looks like there's a debate between Helping Hand and Trick Room. Looks like Trick Room's the thing locked in. And there is that Terrassilization. This is surely on the Zacian. Yeah, I wouldn't imagine the Suicune wants to Terra Grass here. And yeah, there is that Terrassilization on Zacian to the Terra Fighting. That would boost the power of its Sacred Swords, but that's definitely not what it's going for here. It's definitely wanting to aim that Behemoth Blade, probably right at that Gothitelle. Earth Power is coming out. Let's see how much does it. Zacian does nothing! Wow, it did absolutely zero damage. Behemoth Blade into Landorus. I bet Charlie is actually disappointed at that. Probably regrets going for that KO on Landorus now because, yeah, the Landorus was doing jack squat. I don't even think that would have threatened to knock out if the Zacian had not Terrasilized. Yeah, that wouldn't have, I don't think it would have knocked it out even if there was no Snarl. So that might be good information for Charlie to know in the future. It's kind of fake pressure, it looks like. Now we have a tricky decision to be made from Mason. If you go into Pelipper, you're not going to be threatening a knockout onto the Suicune anytime soon. Again, you've taunted it, but you're not going to be knocking it out. Pelipper will be able to get a nice, straightforward 1-hit KO on Zacian. It is using Life Orb and has Hurricane, so it definitely will be able to knock out the Zacian with no trouble. But yeah, it's the Suicune that I think that's the issue. I think that Mason's correctly identified as well how to handle that. Go for that Helping Hand Hurricane into the Suicune. I don't know if it's going to be enough to knock it out, though. That's the thing. It's kind of telegraphed for Charlie to go for a Protect here with Zacian. Charlie could say, I think you're likely not to actually throw an attack my way. The Suicune was a big problem last game. You see that Helping Hand? That goes for Protect, so we don't know if the Zacian's protected yet. Let's see. There is no Protect, so Hurricane lands into the Suicune. Is that enough for a KO? It is. Okay, that's a pretty big KO. Suicune being down means that no more Scalds later. It doesn't get those rain-boosted Scalds either. So the Zacian going for the Behemoth Blade into the Gothitelle isn't enough for a KO. It is at that reduced amount of health. Thanks to those snarls from earlier, Gothitelle's going down. So with Pelipper and Calyrex-Ice left on Mason's side, I imagine we're probably going to see, Iron Hands come in. Iron Hands here is in a real good spot. Iron Hands can both use Fake Outs to stop the Calyrex from moving, but it could also probably underspeed the Pelipper. The Pelipper is holding a Life Orb, and I think it had a lot of HP based on its HP stat. Yeah, 167 I think is, normally Pelipper with just 4 HP has a low amount. So it's likely that the Pelipper is designed to operate in Trick Room. But if the Iron Hands gets this turn right, I think where the Fake Out goes. Like if you Fake Out, for example, into the Pelipper, that would stop it from moving. And I don't think Glacial Lance is threatening a knockout onto the Zacian right now. So if Zacian is able to respond with a Behemoth Blade, that would deal just so much damage in return. We do see that Terastallization coming out. The Pelipper will Terastallize to this Terra Grass. That will make it so Wild Charge will not be able to knock out the Pelipper. So potentially Mason, in doing this play, is saying, yeah, I think your Iron Hands is slower, or maybe just doesn't want to take that damage trade no matter what. But there is no Fake Out. A Glacial Lance lands into the Zacian, not a KO, importantly, but Wild Charge was the move of choice, landing into that Terra Grass Pelipper, doing no damage. Now the Pelipper will be able to follow up with a KO into the Zacian with Hurricane. That Terra Fighting was useful earlier to take less damage from Earth Power, but it ends up costing as the Terra Fighting makes it weak to this Hurricane. So Glacial Lance and Hurricane would have dealt much less damage to a Steel-type Zacian. It would have taken more damage from the Earth Power earlier, but maybe it still would have fainted that combination attack. And you could always just go for a Weather Ball too. So in any case, it looks like the last Pokemon is Screamtail. So the Pokemon were the same from Charlie. The order they came out was I think also the same. I think they came out in this order as well. But now it looks like we're in a pretty good spot. If you're Mason, I think you're looking pretty good. Because you got those KOs earlier, now it's pretty straightforward. I think you just go for a Glacial Lance into Iron Hands. I think that should pick it up. If you're worried about that, you could go for a Helping Hand or a High Horsepower. Both of those would be enough. But yeah, Glacial Lance into Iron Hands should do enough. We saw how much damage it did in Game 1. We saw how much damage it did in Game 2. We see how much damage it does in Game 3. That's a KO on Iron Hands. And now, Pelipper will deal a whole lot of damage into the Screamtail. Even if Screamtail survives, there's no way Screamtail is going to be able to 1v2 these remaining Pokemon. And Screamtail does not survive the attack, goes down to the Life Orb boosted Weather Ball. And we have a Game 3 here in Round 3 of Swiss at the League Cup at the Collector Store. So, really good back and forth set so far. I do think that Landorus adjustment was kind of fake, though. The Landorus, as we saw, I think the only reason that worked out for Mason was because Charlie took the KO on Landorus, thinking that the Landorus would do too much damage. I think if there was a Behemoth Blade into the Gothitelle instead, and Gothitelle was knocked out, I think that game is very different, because then Zacian is taking almost no damage from Earth Power, and it will be able to Behemoth Blade into Calyrex, probably setting Trick Room. I don't think you can afford to go into Pelipper there. Pelipper will just take too much damage from Play Rough. It can also get snarled down. So I don't really like that Landorus adjustment. I don't think that's a good idea. I expect Mason will realize that and probably not try the Landorus route again. That would have worked if you could just snipe the Zacian with Helping Hand Earth Power, but that's too easy. Mason probably realizes that Charlie isn't going to just give it to him. So we see Gothitelle. Mason knows Gothitelle is the thing that he's starting off with. The Suicune, again, here is still the trickiest thing, I think. The Amoonguss is the best answer for a Suicune that Mason has. But the downside of doing it is... that the... Oh, I see what he's... Okay, if you had done Iron Valiant there, potentially if you, like, read a Protect on turn 1, then you can, like, switch Landorus straight away into Iron Valiant and lock the Zacian down. But it looks like not what he's considering. Instead, going for this Landorus route. I don't know about this. So the downside of this, like, think about what happened. Mason got those first 2 turns, like, exactly right, with both the Earth Power and the Taunt into the Suicune, preventing it from setting up potentially Tailwind. Doesn't catch a Tailwind, instead catches a Snarl. But Zacian knows now that he can just take these Earth Powers, no problem. In fact, I don't even think you have to Terrasilize it. I think if you're Charlie, then you've kind of realized that Protect turn 1 onto this Zacian is, like, just super free. You stop that. I guess one downside of that is potentially Trick Room could go up. Helping Hand Earth Power into the Suicune would also deal some damage to it, but again, that doesn't change anything. Like, the Zacian can still... it also could just Terrasilize now. Like, we've already seen that this damage into Zacian is not real. Like, it's not going to do enough. So Zacian, I think, could pretty safely protect and then just go for attacks, and it's not under it's not under any pressure. So Mason has to figure out how to capitalize on this. Potentially going for Helping Hand Earth Power into the Suicune would be the most damaging thing that he could go for, but yeah, it looks like instead considering potentially a Trick Room play, Trick Room and U-turn into Calyrex could potentially be one way to get around that. But it looks like, nope, instead we're just going to see Earth Power into Zacian. No Terrasalization. It does 90% to Zacian. Zacian is now going to respond back with a Behemoth Blade into the Gothitelle. No Fake Out landed that way, and that's a 1-hit KO on the Gothitelle. No, the Gothitelle is not able to survive that attack. Now Suicune can do whatever it wants. Yeah, Snarl. So recognizing, hey, you're not going to go for the Helping Hand Earth Power into the Zacian. That play has so many ways of failing. It could just... the Terrasalization could just come out straight away from the Zacian. The Zacian go for Protect, and there could be a Snarl or Tailwind, so you're not going to do that. So just going for the attack, but I do think that this is different. So the reason why Earth Power wasn't threatening on, like, that last turn, or, like, in Game 1, was because of that Terra fighting, like, reducing the damage by so much, so that another follow-up Earth Power wouldn't knock out. Now we see that Mason does have the option of going for that Earth Power and Trick Room. It is tricky, though. Like, you really would ideally not want to go for Earth Power into Zacian. You'd want to be in Glacial Lance KO range, because you know that next turn there's going to be Scream Tail or Iron Hands on the field, and that's not going to work out. But it looks like Zacian is just going to retreat. Probably into Scream Tail, if I had to guess. Yeah, Scream Tail's coming out. That's a very bulky Pokemon. After this Snarl from the Suicune, it's going to take very low damage. And there is one big difference between last game and this game. The Suicune hasn't been damaged at all, so... yeah, Earth Power here into Scream Tail is going to do just some damage, not a lot. The Suicune going to follow up with a Scald into Calyrex, trying to catch that burn early. Let's see if it does. No burn, so Trick Room goes up with very low damage in response. Now, we do have a sneak preview of Mason's remaining Pokemon. We do know that it's not that Amoonguss, so no option to, like, send out Amoonguss and potentially Rage Powder away the Scalds for a while. I think you're just going to have to accept at some point that you're going to have to take this Scald. But Landorus, I think, also has to get off the board, too. Landorus is in a real bad spot. Potentially could get disabled by Scream Tail. That would be bad. Scald into Landorus is bad. Snarl into Landorus is bad. Like, almost anything into Landorus is bad, and Landorus can't almost do anything good either. So it's got to get off the board. And there's not a huge punish that you can do. If you're Charlie, then I think you're expecting either the Pelipper or the Amoonguss in the back, and probably expecting Pelipper based on the lead in Game 2 being the same. And yeah, we do see that Pelipper in the back. So that will be able to come in probably okay on a combination attack. We do see Scream Tail likely Terrasilize as well. Again, I don't expect this to be the Suicune making itself weak to Glacial Lance. Instead, it's going to be that Scream Tail changing to Terra Water to take much less damage from Glacial Lances that Mason would prefer to use. But we do just see the Protect from Calyrex. That's going to prevent it from taking any damage this turn. I think a big question is going to be, can a double target from Calyrex and Pelipper pick up a KO somewhere? It looks like the Encore was aimed at the Calyrex as well, trying to lock it into something so the game state and Trick Room would be a little bit more telegraphed. I imagine a high horsepower and a Hurricane will pick up a KO onto this Screamtail. The Pokemon that could switch in on that would also be Iron Hands, and it doesn't really want to take that combination attack. Glacial Lance would also be, like, fine to use here. I think Glacial Lance and Hurricane probably would get the Screamtail, being Life Orb on the Pelipper and all. And that put a little bit of chip damage on the Suicune, and you really need chip damage. Debating whether or not to Terrasilize, I think, also is kind of critical. The Terrasilization on Calyrex wouldn't do that much defensively. It would mean it would take less damage from the incoming Scalds. But again, the thing that matters the most about Scald is, does it burn? And we do see a Glacial Lance critical hit into Screamtail, definitely making it so this Hurricane has no downside. Like, it's definitely going to KO for sure. Hurricane will knock out the Screamtail, removing the Terrasilization option from Charlie's side. And now, Life Orb deals a little bit of damage back to the Pelipper. Scald lands into the Calyrex. So again, does it get that burn? It used it twice. Does get that burn. So if you use Scald twice, it's about a 50-50 to get that burn. So Calyrex does get it, and it doesn't get an attack boost as well out of the exchange because the attacking order there was Calyrex, then Pelipper. So we do see Iron Hands come in, and saving that Terrasilization can be important for this Iron Hands. Makes sense. Resisting the Wild Charge will be effective. However, I don't think you're going to get it so easy like you did last time. The Wild Charge into Pelipper, I think, is something like you really want to do. And I feel like you kind of have to Terra Grass this. But then it's like there's Fake Out and Snarl. You could just go for Fake Out into Calyrex as well. Like, that's reasonable enough to do. I think it's going to come down, actually, to how well this Pelipper and probably the Landorus out of Trick Room can do. The Landorus actually, so having not gone down this time, means the Landorus actually is pretty effective into the late game Zacian. Like, it will be able to just, like, pick up a KO onto the Zacian with Sandsear Storm or with Earth Power, or those would be the moves that you'd use to do it. We do just see the Fake Out into the Pelipper this time. Not messing around. The high horsepower landing into the Suicune will deal negligible damage. Let's see what happens, though. Does the Suicune... Yeah, it just goes for Snarl. So that's going to reduce the damage of both Calyrex and Pelipper. And I think, importantly, it probably puts the Pelipper into Drain Punch plus Life Orb recoil range. So that means that the Suicune is likely probably going to survive here. Well, actually, that wouldn't impact whether or not it survives. But with that Snarl, I think it's a decent shot that it survives. So it looks like actually considering going into the Landorus. So again, that's risky. You could get a Snarl. You could be hit with a Snarl on the way in. And you need this Landorus to be healthy in order to deal with the Zacian in the late game. These Pokemon are now all either weak or take neutral damage from Behemoth Blade. So Landorus coming in here needs to pull its weight here in the end game. Glacial Lance does come out. That's going to deal some damage to the Suicune and Iron Hands, but not too much thanks to that burn. Let's see if it can last through this turn. Drain Punch does land into the Landorus. Is this just a Snarl? Is it a Scald? Either of those moves are going to be a lot of damage into either of these Pokemon. Let's see what happens, though. It is just a Snarl, so not a KO. That I think Mason probably needs that the most out of anything. But yeah, what do you do on this next turn? The Earth Power is likely probably not picking up a knockout onto the Iron Hands, although Trick Room is over and you will move first. You definitely can't knock out Suicune either, and either of these Pokemon just have to aim one attack at Calyrex to prevent it from setting up a second Trick Room, which means that you're dealing with Landorus, like, trying to win out of Trick Room against this, but also, the Landorus can't KO either of these Pokemon, so you can just throw a Scald at the Landorus. So, do you have to, like, switch out your Landorus and go back into Pelipper, potentially trying to take a Snarl, and then maybe you can win with Helping Hand Sandsear Storm, maybe? I don't know. But it looks like if you're considering Trick Room here, like, it's so tricky. Like, what do you do? There's so much pressure from this Suicune. And it looks like there is just a Sandsear Storm being locked in. That's not going to KO either without a critical hit. Yep, no critical hit on either Pokemon. So Suicune now will be able to respond to the Scald, picking up a KO on Landorus thanks to that Rain Boost. Landorus is going down, and Iron Hand should be able to finish off the remaining HP on Calyrex. Drain Punch will easily do the, I think, 35, yeah, 36 HP it had remaining. Critical hit to boot, just to make sure you had no chance. The Calyrex goes down, and now the only Pokemon remaining is Pelipper. And Pelipper, once the Zacian comes out on the field, will easily be felled to a single Behemoth Blade if it doesn't faint to the combination of Scalds and Drain Punches and Snarls coming its way beforehand. So really well played there by Charlie. I think Charlie used their Suicune very effectively. I'm really surprised not to see Amoonguss in games 2 or 3 there. Maybe Mason just thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to break through with Spore. Spore, like, gives me turns, but it doesn't give me damage. And thinking that, yeah, I need damage from Landorus. But Landorus there, in the end, didn't pick up any KOs. And we see a tailwind there from Suicune, guaranteeing speed control for the remainder of the game. Drain Punch into Pelipper, not enough for a knockout, but there's only 14 HP remaining. Pelipper, using any move, will cause Life Orb to activate and deal the rest of the damage to itself to be KO'd. So we'll see a Life Orb Weather Ball into the Iron Hands, not enough for a KO, and Pelipper will KO itself with its Life Orb Recoil. So really fun set there between Charlie and Mason. Let me see if I can find the record. I don't remember what the records of these two were. I think they were both 2-0, so I think that was a 2-0 match on both sides. So both are, so Chris moves on to, or Charlie, excuse me. Charlie moves on to 3-0, and Mason will remain at 2-1. Can still top cut this event by winning the final round. We'll have to see.